Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, let us journey not to a place of stone and pyramid, but to a place of constant movement. Let us go to the great ocean of sand, the Sahara. This vast expanse is not empty, but full of invisible roads. And on these roads, let us find a people draped in indigo, the men veiled, the women unveiled, and often in command. The Celt Amashek, those whom others call Tuareg, they have been called many names. The blue people, for the dye of their robes that stains the skin. The knights of the desert, for their legendary swords and their fierce independence. But there is another name, less known, spoken only in the quiet of women's tents under the night sky. A name for the women who lead the caravans, who read the stars as fluently as scribes read scripture, who carry freedom not in declarations, but in the rhythm of a camel's gait and the weight of silver in their saddlebags. They are called Iduan Enteri, the moon's daughters. In the world of the Tuareg, the sun is the adversary. It is the thief of water, the hammer of heat, the eraser of shadows. It shrinks the world to a shimmering point of survival. But the night is the ally. When the sun retreats, the world expands. The air cools, the silence deepens, and the sky becomes a vast, glittering map. For the moon's daughters, the night is not a time of rest. It is a time of work, of travel, of creation, of decision. They navigate by poetry, each star a word in an epic song that stretches back to the beginning of their people. They craft silver under moonlight, believing the metal absorbs the moon's coolness and reflection. They dissolve marriages under the witness of the stars. A woman's sovereignty asserted in 3 nights of patient waiting beneath a simple blue cloth. Think of it. While much of the world was codifying laws that restricted women, these desert matriarchs were exercising a profound and practical autonomy. Their power wasn't inherited from a father or granted by a husband. It was woven into the very fabric of their society. Matrilineal and a woman owned the tent, the central point of family life. If a marriage ended, it was the man who packed his camel and returned to his mother's camp. This isn't a modern reinterpretation. It's an ancient reality. Their society was built on a different axis, one where female wisdom and mobility were not exceptions but cornerstones. Tonight, we will follow the invisible threads of their starlit lives. We will learn the Tisnak, the celestial map song. Imagine a poem of hundreds of verses that is also a GPS, a weather report, and a genealogy. The Tisnak isn't just memorized, it's sung. It's a living document passed from mother to daughter, an oral library containing generations of knowledge about wells, grazing lands, and treacherous passages. To sing the Tisnak is to hold the desert in your mind. The positions of constellations guide the way. The brightness of certain stars predicts the weather, and the stories within the verses recount the history of the clans who traveled these same paths. It's a technology of the mind, more reliable than any modern device in a land where batteries die and signals fail. We will kneel beside the mobile forges, watching women transform raw silver into pendants that hold the memory of particular dunes, particular oases, particular nights. These aren't just trinkets. They are a form of currency, a bank account worn on the body. But more than that, they are art, history, and identity. The designs of the cross of our goddess, for instance, vary from clan to clan, each a distinct signature. A woman's jewelry tells you where she is from, her status, and her personal history. The act of creation itself is a ritual. Under the moon's gaze, with a small bellows and a charcoal fire, these women hammer and shape the metal, embedding into it not just patterns, but stories and prayers. The silver becomes a talisman, a cool weight against the skin that carries the power of the night. And we will witness the profound, quiet ritual of the divorce tent, where a woman's word witnessed only by the sky, carries the weight of law. When a woman decides a marriage is over, she erects a small, separate tent. She remains there for 3 nights. No arguments, no lengthy legal proceedings. Her action is her statement. It is a testament to a society that values a woman as happiness and her right to choose her own path. At the end of the 3 nights, the community holds a celebration. Not a somber event, but a party to announce her return to single life, to availability. It's a practice that underscores a deep respect for individual autonomy, a stark contrast to the patriarchal norms that have dominated so many other cultures for centuries. And we will join the last great caravan before the borders came the final journey of the old routes. When the moon's daughters sang their star songs, not to find their way, but to ensure the way would never be forgotten. Before the straight lines of modern nations were drawn across the sand, the Sahara was a web of fluid routes, an open space for trade and cultural exchange. Caravans, sometimes hundreds of camels strong, were the lifeblood of this world. And the women were often the organizers, the financiers, the navigators. They managed the logistics, negotiated the trades, and held the social fabric of the caravan together. This final journey represents more than just the end of an economic era. It's the closing of a chapter on a form of freedom that was borderless, a way of life lived in motion. This is a story about freedom. Not freedom as an abstract political ideal, but freedom as a tangible, portable practice. Freedom that fits in a saddlebag, that is learned in childhood verses, that is forged in a tiny flame, that is claimed in a few square feet of fabric. The freedom of women who carried their world with them, who needed no permission to move, who read the sky as a letter addressed directly to them. Their independence wasn't fought for in battles or written into constitutions. It was lived every single day in the choices they made, the knowledge they held, and the respect they commanded. They were not just participants in their culture, they were its primary architects and guardians. As we begin, let us imagine the cool night air of the desert, the soft groan of camels settling, the distant glitter of a billion stars, and the low, melodic voice of a woman singing the map of her ancestors. Let's pause for a moment. The fire crackles gently as the night breathes round us. Listen, in the silence between our flames, you might hear it's the echo of a tenned drum, the whisper of indigo cloth, the faint tap-tap of a silver hammer under the moon. The moon's daughters are beginning their journey. Let us follow. Thank you for watching, and if you're drawn to these stories, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next journey. Have you ever wondered if there's a map more accurate than any GPS, more reliable than a compass? A map woven not from paper and ink, but from starlight, memory, and song. Today, we journey into the heart of the Sahara, into the world of the Tuareg people, to discover a form of navigation so profound it transforms a simple journey into a conversation with the ancestors. By the end of our time together, you'll understand how a song could be more precise than any modern device, and why Tuareg women looked to the night sky and saw not distant suns, but the glowing embers of their grandmothers' hearth fires left burning in the darkness to guide them home. The Tuareg understanding of the cosmos was deeply personal, a stark contrast to the distant, scientific view of modern astronomy. They didn't see constellations as mythical gods or heroes locked in some ancient, celestial battle. When they gazed into the vast, clear desert night, they saw something far more intimate, far more familiar. They saw the scattered campfires of the ancestors. Their cosmology was built around a beautiful, powerful belief. When a great matriarch, the heart of her family and her camp, passed away, her hearth fire, the center of warmth and life, did not truly go out. Instead, Its embers were gently lifted into the sky. They were arranged in the exact pattern of the camp where she had lived, set to burn for eternity as a constant, loving guide for her descendants, still journeying on the sands below. And the Milky Way, that breathtaking river of light that we see stretching across the heavens. To them, it wasn't a river of stars at all. It was the smoke from 1,000, 1,000,000 ancestral fires, rising and mingling together in the great dark tent of the sky. This worldview wasn't just poetry. It was a fundamental shift in perception. It turned the act of navigation from a cold, technical skiller, matter of angles and coordinates into a sacred act of communion. To follow the stars was to literally follow the path laid out by the ancestors. To read the night sky was to listen to the whispers of the grandmothers, to feel their guidance across time and space. The primary tools for this celestial communion were the celestial map songs, known as the Tisnak. These were not dry lists of directions or star charts. The Tisnak were epic poems, vast and intricate, brimming with sensory detail, emotion, and collective memory. Each verse of a Tisnak corresponded to a single night's journey across the desert. But a verse did much more than simply point the way. It captured the very essence of that night's travel, painting a picture for all the senses. For example, a verse for the third night traveling out from the famous Timbuktu salt flats would just say, "Continue heading southeast." That's the language of a compass, not the language of the grandmothers. A Tisnak verse would be far richer. It might sing, "Here the sand remembers the weight of the old ones, camels." It sings beneath your feet with a voice like grinding millstones. This tells the traveler about the texture and sound of the terrain, a clue that they are on the right path. The verse might continue, "The air tastes of the distant well of Tinhinan. You cannot drink it yet, but you can taste its promise." This encodes scent and even taste, training the navigator to be exquisitely sensitive to subtle changes in the atmosphere. Changes that signal proximity to a water source days before it's visible. And finally, the verse would tie it all back to the sky. The star that sits on the shoulder of the warrior will kiss the horizon just as you reach the dune, shaped like a resting lion. This is the genius of the Tisnak. It weaves together the celestial and the terrestrial, the sensory and the spiritual, into a single, unforgettable narrative. The song was a multisensory map, encoding scent, sound, texture, taste, and sight into a cohesive, easily memorized verse. This wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about experiencing the journey, about feeling the land and the sky as a living, breathing entity that was communicating with you. When a caravan of Tuareg women moved through the moonlit dunes, the lead woman would often be singing softly, her voice carrying back along the line of camels and people. The camels themselves seemed to move in rhythm with her melody, the entire caravan becoming a single, flowing organism, guided by a song that was both a map and a prayer. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Tisnak was that it was not a static, unchanging text. It was a living, breathing archive. A cultural document that was constantly being edited and enriched by each new generation of women. The Sahara is a dynamic landscape. New wells are dug, old ones run dry. New trade routes are established, creating new arteries of commerce and communication. Landmarks gain new significance through important events. All of these changes were woven into the great, ever-expanding tapestry of the song. A woman might add a new verse to commemorate the night her daughter was born under a particular and memorable configuration of stars, forever linking that celestial pattern to a specific place and a joyful memory. Another verse might be added to mark the location where a precious, lost amulet was miraculously found, sanctifying that patch of sand and adding a layer of personal history to the collective map. The song was a dynamic chronicle, a geographical and an emotional history of the Tuareg people, specifically its women, who were the keepers of this sacred knowledge. So, to know the Tiznak was to know so much more than the physical geography of the Sahara. It was to know the emotional landscape of the women who had crossed it for centuries. It was to carry within you the story of every birth, every loss, every miracle, every hardship, and every triumph that had occurred along those ancient paths. The stars were not just points of light, they were waypoints in a grand, unfolding story. The dunes were not just piles of sand, they were the pages on which that story was written. This tradition challenges our modern assumptions about knowledge and technology. We often think of progress as a linear path, from so-called primitive methods to sophisticated digital tools. But the Tiznak reveals a different kind of sophistication or deep ecological and spiritual intelligence that our GPS systems, for all their precision, simply cannot replicate. A GPS can tell you where you are. It can tell you the fastest route, but it cannot tell you how the sand will feel under your feet. It cannot tell you what the air will taste like when you are near water, and it certainly cannot connect you to the living memory of your ancestors, making you feel their presence with every step you take. The Tuareg women, with their songs of starlight and sand, show us that the most powerful navigation tools are not always the ones we hold in our hands. Sometimes they are the ones we hold in our hearts and in our voices. They teach us that to truly know a place, you must do more than map its coordinates. You must learn its songs. You must learn to see the world, not just with your eyes, but with your entire being, to feel its history, and to hear its stories echoing in the wind and written in the stars. It's a beautiful reminder that in our quest for ever more advanced technology, we should be careful not to lose the ancient, profound wisdom that connects us to the earth, to the sky, and to each other. Have you ever thought about what it means to truly know a place? Not just to have a map of it, but to feel its pulse, to know its stories, to carry its history in your bones. For the Tuareg people of the Sahara, this isn't a poetic idea. It's a practical reality, encoded in a breathtaking oral tradition called the Tiznak. The structure of the Tiznak was a masterpiece of spoken engineering. It wasn't a single, straightforward poem that you'd read from beginning to end. Instead, it was a dynamic, modular system, a kind of living, breathing GPS with countless branching pathways. At its heart was the Tisili, the Great Route. This was the main artery of their world, mapping the annual migration from the dry season pastures of the Sahel all the way to the salt mines deep in the Sahara and back again. This journey was a 40-night epic, and the Tiznak had 40 verses to match it, each verse corresponding to a single day's travel. But the Tiznak was so much more than just this central route. From this main trunk, countless tributaries branched off. There were specific verses for the journey to the oasis of Baobab, a magical place where a unique green date grew, found nowhere else on Earth. There were verses for the secret, hidden paths leading into the Ahagar Mountains, knowledge held closely by only a few select family lineages. And incredibly, there were even verses for routes that were no longer in use. These weren't discarded as useless. The grandmothers, the keepers of this knowledge, insisted that memory was not a tool to be thrown away when its immediate use had passed. To them, memory was a treasure, something to be cherished for its own sake, a link to the ancestors that must never be broken. So, how did this incredible system work? The verses themselves were intricate, layered with information. Each one was built in a three-part structure. The first part described the stars of that particular night. It would detail their position in the sky, their brightness, their relationship to one another. This was the raw navigational data, but it wasn't presented like a dry textbook. It was woven into beautiful, evocative metaphors. A phrase like, "When the three maidens stand guard over the sleeping camel's hump," wasn't just poetry. It was a precise celestial coordinate, referring to a specific declination of a specific group of stars. The second part of the verse brought the traveler back down to earth. It described the terrestrial signs, the feel of the sand underfoot, the distinct shape of a dune against the horizon, the subtle scent carried on the wind. This was the confirmation data. It allowed the traveler to cross-reference the celestial map with her own senses to verify her position in the physical world. It was a way of grounding the abstract knowledge of the stars in the immediate, tangible reality of the desert. And then came the third part, the heart and soul of the verse, memory. This part would tell a story connected to that specific location, a story of an ancestor who had camped right there, a birth that happened under those same stars, a marriage that was celebrated, a death that was mourned, or a profound revelation that was received. This was the emotional anchor. It transformed a simple coordinate on a map into a sacred site, a place charged with history, emotion, and ancestral presence. It ensured that the journey was not just a physical act of moving from point A to point B, but a spiritual pilgrimage through a landscape of memory. The way a young Tuareg girl learned the Tiznak is just as fascinating. She didn't start by cramming verses and memorizing words. She began by absorbing the melody. The song had this haunting, minor key tune that rose and fell with the same gentle rhythm as the desert dunes themselves. Long before she could understand the meaning of the words, she knew the contour of the melody. She would hear her grandmother humming it while she worked, while she walked through the camp, while she rocked a baby to sleep. The tune became a part of her, settling deep into her bones. Only later, once the melody was an inseparable part of her being, were the words layered on top. Each verse, with its celestial data, its terrestrial signs, and its ancestral stories, would find its natural, proper place within the existing musical architecture. This way, the Tiznak wasn't so much memorized as it was absorbed. As naturally and instinctually as a baby learns its mother's heartbeat in the womb. It was a deep, cellular knowing. Let's just pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Imagine this. The fire is crackling softly, and the vast, cool night of the Sahara breathes around us. Imagine learning geography not from a flat, two-dimensional page, but from the living, singing voice of the woman who raised you, the woman who holds all the stories of your people. Imagine seeing the Sahara not as a barren, empty wasteland, but as a vast cathedral of memory. Every dune has a name. Every star is a relative watching over you. Every night's journey is another verse in an endless, beautiful song that connects you to everyone who has ever walked that path before. It's a completely different way of seeing the world. But the Tiznak was more than just a map or a collection of stories. It was also a powerful tool of quiet resistance when colonial officials arrived, and later when bureaucrats from newly formed nation-states tried to impose their borders and their ways. They were baffled. They would demand to know how the Tuareg could navigate this immense, seemingly featureless landscape with such precision, without modern maps or compasses. And the women, the keepers of the song, would simply smile and say, "We know the way." They didn't explain the song. They didn't share the verses. The Tiznak was their secret, but not because it was deliberately hidden in a locked box. It was a secret because it was fundamentally untranslatable. How could you possibly explain to a man holding a sextant and a chart that your navigation relied on following the faint scent of a hidden well? A scent your great-grandmother had ascribed to your grandmother, who had then described it to you. How could you explain that the knowledge of that scent was encoded in a melody that rose in a very specific way, precisely as the star Rigel touched the horizon? You couldn't. It was a different language, a different reality. So you just smiled, held the knowledge close, and said, "We know the way." It was an act of profound cultural preservation, protecting a worldview that was too deep and too sacred to be flattened into lines on a piece of paper. The Tisnak wasn't just a map of the land. It was a map of their identity, their history, and their soul. Imagine, if you will, a vast expanse of sand under a sky ablaze with stars. This isn't just a desert, it's a classroom. For the people of the caravan, the true teaching, the heart of their knowledge, couldn't happen within the temporary safety of a camp. It had to unfold on the move, out on the trail. This knowledge was encapsulated in a song, a map woven from melody and memory, known as the Tisnak. A girl's first long journey was her final examination. She might be 12 or perhaps 14. By then, she would have heard the Tisnak 1,000 times. She could sing it perfectly, every verse, every subtle shift in tone, every pause, but there is a world of difference between hearing and singing and truly using. Knowing the words is not the same as knowing the way. Picture this, a caravan at dusk, the camels groaning softly as they are prepared for the night's journey. An elderly woman, a grandmother perhaps, adjusts the saddle on a young girl's camel. She checks the girth, her hands sure and practiced. The girl watches, her expression a mixture of nervousness and fierce determination. This is her moment. Her grandmother, or sometimes her mother's sister, would take the lead. The girl wouldn't ride behind, but beside her, an apprentice at the master's side. The first night, as they set out into the cool darkness, the grandmother would sing the first verse of the Tisnak, softly, almost to herself. The girl would listen, her eyes not on her guide, but on the stars, the very stars the song described. She would be connecting the notes to the constellations, the lyrics to the landscape. The second night, the pattern would shift. The grandmother would sing the first verse, then fall silent. The pause was an invitation. The girl, her voice perhaps trembling slightly at first, would sing the second verse. And so it would go, night after night. The song wasn't just being recited. It was being lived. It was unfolding in real time, a map being read aloud across the actual geography it charted. Each verse corresponded to a specific leg of the journey, a particular cluster of stars, a uniquely shaped dune. This was more than memorization. It was a deep, sensory immersion. The girl was learning to feel the rhythm of the desert in the rhythm of the song. She was learning to see the landscape not just with her eyes, but with the collective eyes of all the generations who had sung this song before her. The journey was the lesson, and the song was the key. But the true test, the moment that would define her as a navigator, would come unannounced. It would arrive on a night of crisis. Perhaps a sudden, violent sandstorm had swept through, erasing the familiar shapes of the dunes, leaving a chaotic, featureless sea of sand. Or maybe a camel had sickened, forcing a delay that threw their entire schedule off, making them late to their intended waypoint. The desert is a master of disruption. On such a night, the grandmother would stop her camel. She would turn to the girl, her face unreadable in the faint starlight, and she would say nothing. That silence was the most profound question the girl would ever face. It was the examination. It asked, without a single word, "Where are we? Where do we go now?" The girl, her heart likely pounding in her chest, would have to draw on everything she had learned. She would look up at the sky, searching for breaks in the clouds. 4 familiar stars, obscured, but still visible in patches. She would feel the ground beneath her camel's feet, trying to assess the grain of the sand. Was it coarse, from a windswept ridge, or fine, from a sheltered basin? She might even taste the air, searching for the faintest hint of moisture, the ghost of a distant well that the song promised was near. Then, when she had gathered all the clues the desert offered, she would begin to sing, but she wouldn't sing the next verse in the sequence they had been following. That would be useless now. They were off course. Instead, she would sing the verse that corresponded to where she believed they were. She would choose the part of the song that matched her new location. If she was right, if her assessment of the stars, the sand, and the air was correct, the grandmother would nod slowly. And then, a moment later, she would join in, her voice harmonizing with the girls. Their combined voices would be the signal. The caravan, which had waited in silent anticipation, would begin to move forward. Its direction corrected, its path re-established, and if she was wrong, the grandmother would gently correct her. She would start a different verse, the right verse, and they would adjust their course. There was no shame in this error. There was no scolding, no disappointment. The only failure would have been in not trying, in succumbing to the fear and the uncertainty of being lost. The lesson was in the attempt, in the courage to make a decision based on knowledge and intuition. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine that scene. The fire crackles softly in our minds, the vast, quiet night breathing around us. Think of that moment of solitary responsibility. The weight of the entire caravan, the valuable salt and precious dates they carry. The very lives of her people rests on this young girl's ability to match a line from a song to a pattern of stars. The trust of her grandmother, the memory of her ancestors, all of it comes down to this single, crucial choice. This is how true freedom is taught. It's not taught through lectures or abstract rules written in a book. It is taught through the gradual, loving transfer of competence. It's the empowerment that comes from knowing you have the skills to navigate not just the desert, but life's inevitable crises. It's the confidence born from being trusted with real responsibility. This is education in its purest, most profound form. The girl who successfully navigated that crisis was no longer just a girl. She was a Tisnak navigator. She had proven she could do more than just sing the song. She could use it as the living tool it was meant to be. Her voice now carried the authority of experience. Other girls would listen to her sing around the campfire, not just hearing a melody, but hearing the story of survival, of knowledge in action. She was becoming part of the chain of tradition, a future grandmother who would one day test her own apprentice in the silent, starlit desert. But the teaching didn't stop there. There was an even more advanced level, a higher mastery. This was the teaching of adaptation, because the desert, and indeed the universe itself, is never truly static. The stars, which seem so constant to our short lives, are not perfectly fixed. Their positions shift subtly with the seasons. Over generations, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, means that the stars are not in the exact same place they were when a verse of the Tisnak was first composed. A verse sung by a great-grandmother might be slightly, almost imperceptibly, inaccurate for her great-granddaughter. A landmark dune mentioned in a lyric might have been worn down by centuries of wind. A well might have dried up, or a new one might have been discovered. A truly skilled navigator knew this. She didn't just know the song by heart. She felt it in her bones. She could feel the tiny discrepancies between the song's description and the sky's actual arrangement. She could sense when the map needed a minor adjustment. This was the highest level of mastery. Not just knowing the song, but knowing when the song needed to be sung a little differently. Knowing how to improvise. She might add a grace note, hum a slightly different pitch, or subtly change the rhythm of a line to account for a star that had drifted from its ancient position. This wasn't sacrilege. It was the ultimate respect for the tradition. It was keeping the song alive and accurate. The Tisnak was never meant to be a rigid, unchanging text. It was a living conversation, a dialogue between the ancestors who first charted the way, and the living who now traveled it, a conversation mediated by the ever-changing sky and the shifting sands. To adapt the song was to participate in that conversation, to add your own generation's voice to the chorus that stretched back through time. This tells us something incredibly powerful about knowledge. True wisdom isn't about clinging to the past without question. It's about understanding the principles of the past so deeply that you know how and when to adapt them for the present. It's about the delicate balance between tradition and innovation, memory and observation. The people of the caravan understood that the most valuable knowledge is not static, but fluid, responsive, and alive. Just like the desert itself, in the vast, silent expanse of the desert, under a canopy of stars so bright they seem almost within reach, a different kind of magic unfolds. Long after the sun has scorched the dunes and retreated below the horizon, a new light takes over. This is the light of the moon, and for a special lineage of women. It is the only light they need to practice their ancient, sacred art. These are the moon's daughters, women who work not with cloth or leather, but with the cool, ethereal glow of metal. They are the teen, the silversmiths of the Tuareg, and their story is as luminous as the creations they forge. Their craft is governed by a beautiful, unwritten law. Silver, the moon's metal, can only be truly mastered at night, bathed in the lunar glow. Gold, they believe, belongs to the sun. It's loud, heavy, almost boastful. But silver is different. It is the moon's essence, captured in solid form, cool, reflective, fluid, and modest. It drinks in the qualities of the moon, absorbing its calm and its clarity. To wear a piece of silver forged under the full moon is to carry a shield, a talisman against the harshness of the sun and the envious glare of the evil eye. Imagine a lone figure kneeling on a sand dune, the desert stretching out around her like a sleeping sea. The moon hangs large and impossibly bright overhead. Before her is a small, ingenious, portable forge. A soft goatskin bellows breathes life into a bed of charcoal. Her anvil is not a massive block of iron, but a smooth, dark stone that fits in the palm of her hand. This is the world of the teen. Their craft is a secret tradition passed down from mother to daughter. This secrecy isn't about excluding men. Tuareg men are often celebrated as master smiths themselves. Instead, it's about preserving a unique lineage, a distinct set of songs, rituals, and sacred knowledge that belongs only to the women. A girl destined to become a teen is often marked from birth, sometimes by a small, silver-shaped birthmark behind her left ear. Her journey into the craft begins not with a hammer and tongs, but with the sky itself. Before she ever touches a piece of silver, she must learn the moon. She becomes an astronomer of the heart, taught to observe its phases, to chart its journey across the night sky, and to understand its relationship with the guiding stars. She learns the celestial calendar by which all her work will be measured. The waxing crescent, a sliver of new light, is for pieces that signify new beginnings, a marriage, a birth, the start of a long journey. The full moon, at the peak of its power, is reserved for forging pieces of protection, amulets imbued with strength and serenity. And the waning gibbous, as the moon begins to recede, is the time for commemorative works honoring the memory of those who have passed into the next world. The Teen S Toolkit is a masterpiece of nomadic engineering, a marvel of miniaturization. Her entire workshop can be packed neatly into a single camel saddlebag, ready to move with the rhythms of desert life. The bellows, crafted from supple, tanned goatskin and sewn with sinew, are fitted with delicate clay nozzles to direct the air with precision. The fuel for her fire is just as specific. The charcoal comes from a particular species of acacia tree that grows only in the rocky valleys of the Ahaga Mountains. It burns fiercely hot and remarkably clean, leaving behind almost no ash to mar her work. Her anvil is a treasure in itself, fist-sized stone of black dolerite, chosen for its incredible density and its ability to withstand the repeated, rhythmic strikes of the hammer without losing its shape. The hammers are not the heavy sledges of a village blacksmith. They are tiny, delicate instruments, with heads of polished metal and handles carved from the slender thigh bones of gazelles, light and perfectly balanced. Even the crucibles where the silver is melted are personal. Each teen shapes her own small clay cups, firing them until they are hard as rock, and consecrating each one with a single, symbolic drop of her own blood, forever linking her life force to the metal she transforms. The work itself is a slow, meditative dance. The teen sits on a folded mat, her legs crossed, her tools laid out before her in a precise, familiar order. With small, rhythmic puffs from the bellows, she coaxes the charcoal to life, raising the temperature of her tiny forge. She doesn't use a gauge or a thermometer. She judges the heat by the shifting color of the flame, the scent of the air, and an intuition born from a lifetime of practice. She takes a piece of raw silver, holding it with long copper tweezers, and introduces it to the heat. She turns it over and over, watching patiently as it transforms, until it glows with the soft, white radiance of the moon itself. Then, the true artistry begins. She places the glowing metal on her small, black stone anvil. With her tiny bone hammer, she begins to coax it into shape. It's a process of persuasion, not force. A gentle curve here, a sharp point there. She uses different hammers to create textures, patterns of tiny, overlapping strokes that catch the moonlight like ripples on the surface of still water. Sparks fly, little constellations of fire that reflect in the deep concentration of her dark eyes. Each tap of the hammer is a prayer, a whisper, a continuation of a story that has been told for countless generations. She might be crafting the iconic cross of a goddess, its intricate shape representing the four corners of the world and the nomadic spirit that knows no boundaries. Or perhaps she is shaping delicate earrings, their designs echoing the constellations above. Maybe it's a series of rings, each one telling a part of a family's history, or a headpiece destined to adorn a bride on her wedding day. The motifs she uses are a rich and ancient language. The triangle represents family and femininity. The zigzag line is the path of a caravan across the dunes. The circle is the eye of the chameleon, a symbol of wisdom and adaptability. These are not mere decorations. They are stories, beliefs, and histories hammered into silver. This entire process is silent, save for the gentle sigh of the bellows, the crackle of the acacia charcoal, and the rhythmic, musical tap-tapping of the hammer on silver. There is no audience, no applause. There is only the woman, the moon, the fire, and the metal. Her focus is absolute, her movements economical and graceful. She is not just a craftswoman. She is a conduit, channeling the energy of the night sky into a tangible form of beauty and meaning. As the first hint of dawn begins to lighten the eastern horizon, the work ceases. The tools are carefully cleaned and packed away. The fire is extinguished. The newly forged silver pieces, now cool to the touch, are wrapped in soft cloth. They seem to hold the memory of the night within them, a quiet luminescence that will stay with them forever. The teen's work is done. She rises, her silhouette framed against the nascent morning, a guardian of a timeless art. To hold a piece of Tuareg silver made by a teen is to hold more than just an ornament. It's to hold a piece of the desert night. It's to feel the coolness of the moon, to see the sparkle of the stars, and to hear the whisper of a tradition carried on the desert wind. It is a connection to a lineage of powerful women who, through their skill and spirit, transform the Earth's raw elements into symbols of light, protection, and enduring beauty. They are the daughters of the moon, and their legacy shines as brightly as the metal they master. Imagine, if you will, the vast, silent expanse of the Sahara Desert at night. The stars are not just pinpricks of light, they are a brilliant, shimmering canopy stretching from horizon to horizon. Below this celestial dome, a caravan has made camp. Dark goat hair tents form a crescent against the sand, and the low murmur of conversation and the soft shuffling of camels settles over the scene. But look closer. Apart from the main camp, under the unobstructed moonlight, a single, small fire glows a warm, solitary star against the immense darkness. This is the smithy, the workshop of a teen. She is a silversmith, but not one you would find in a bustling city souk or a quiet village workshop. The teen were not sedentary artisans. They were caravan women, masters of their craft, whose entire workshop traveled with them, packed with meticulous care into a leather saddlebag, cushioned by soft goat hair. For the teen, setting up camp was synonymous with setting up her forge. As the camels groaned and knelt, and the tents rose like dark sails against the twilight, she would find her own space, not within the communal tent, but away from the noise, where the quiet of the desert could sharpen her focus. Here she would unroll her mat, arrange her tools with the familiarity of a musician tuning an instrument, and begin her work. The rhythm of the caravan was not just the steady thump of camel hooves on sand or the rustle of the wind. It was also punctuated by the delicate, persistent sound of the teen S-craft, the soft tap-tap-tap of a bone hammer on silver. This sound became a heartbeat for the traveling community, a constant reminder of creation and continuity in a landscape defined by movement and impermanence. Requests for her work were never formal commissions. They were whispered into the evening air, woven into the fabric of conversation around the communal fire. A woman, her face illuminated by the flickering flames, might mention, without looking directly at the teen, "My daughter is to be married when we reach the next oasis. Her grandmother's pendant, it was lost in the last sandstorm." The teen would simply nod, her hands never ceasing their work. No promises were made, no contracts signed. But the request was heard, understood, and noted in her mind. A few nights later, as the camp settled once more, a newly forged silver crescent, gleaming with the promise of a new beginning, would appear on the woman's mat. No words needed to be exchanged. Payment would be left in kinder block of salt, a handful of sweet dates, or sometimes simply the profound weight of gratitude. The silver itself was a story in motion. It was a precious, vital commodity, often carried not as ingots, but in the form of old coins. Think of it: Austrian thalers, Ottoman piastres, French francs each, a tiny, metal-stamped testament to global trade routes and colonial histories, finding their way into the heart of the Sahara. Each coin had its own journey, its own epic. A thaler might have been traded for a block of salt in the legendary markets of Timbuktu, then carried by camel train across the dunes to Gadams, where it was exchanged for a basket of dates, only to be carried back south again. It passed through countless hands, witnessed countless sunrises, when the teen held one of these coins in her tweezers over the forge fire, watching it glow red, then white-hot, beginning to soften and flow. She wasn't destroying its history. She was transforming it. She was melting down not just metal, but stories, journeys, and memories. The previous life of the coin was not erased. It was incorporated, absorbed into the new form she was creating. A pendant forged from a melted coin wasn't just a new piece of jewelry. It was a continuation of the coin's story, a new verse added to its long, silent epic. The very act of creation was an act of storytelling. Let's pause here for a moment. Picture that scene again, the gentle crackle of the fire, the deep, quiet breath of the desert night. A lone woman kneeling by her tiny forge, her face serene and focused, her hands steady as she transforms old, forgotten currency into new, meaningful amulets. The sound of her hammer is more than just metal on metal. It's the sound of memory being reshaped. It's the sound of history being made wearable, tangible. It's the sound of the past being carried forward, quite literally, into the future on a chain of silver links. It's a powerful, almost sacred, act of alchemy happening under the vast, watchful eyes of the desert stars. The jewelry created by the teen was fundamentally different from what we might think of as decorative in the Western world. These pieces were not designed to be admired from a distance, displayed in a glass case, or worn only on special occasions. They were meant to be an integral part of life. They were meant to be worn, to be touched, to be rubbed between thumb and forefinger in moments of anxiety, contemplation, or prayer. A crescent moon pendant, a common and powerful symbol, worn over the heart, would, over years, gradually soften its sharp edges against the wearer's skin. It would take on a unique patina, a soft gleam that was a direct reflection of that woman's life, her movements, the very chemistry of her body. It became a part of her. A set of heavy silver earrings, passed from a mother to her daughter on her wedding day, would carry not only the intrinsic value of the silver, but the accumulated wisdom and experiences of the generations who wore them. The cool weight of the metal was also the weight of maternal love, of ancestral guidance. In this way, the jewelry became a living archive. It was a diary etched in silver, a covenant between generations, a physical manifestation of a family's lineage and a people's identity. Each piece contained, within its form and its wear, the memory of starlit journeys across endless sands. It held the echoes of births and deaths, of contracts made and honored with a handshake and a shared cup of tea. It symbolized a fierce independence, a freedom carried not in grand declarations, but in humble leather saddlebags, expressed in the quiet, enduring beauty of silver. The teen herself was more than just a craftswoman. She was a keeper of secrets, a historian, a vital part of the social and spiritual fabric of the caravan. Her work was imbued with protective power. The symbols she forged, the crescent, the cross, the geometric patterns, were not merely ornamental, they were talismans, shields against the evil eye, and anchors to the spiritual world. The value of her creations was not measured in carats or grams, but in their ability to connect, to protect, and to endure. Her status was unique. While she worked apart from the main camp, she was deeply respected. Her hands, which could shape metal with such grace, held a different kind of power. She was an essential thread in the tapestry of Tuareg life, her craft a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people who learned to thrive in one of the world's most challenging environments. So the next time you see a piece of antique silver jewelry, perhaps a Tuareg cross or an old Berber bracelet, take a closer look. Feel its weight in your hand. Look at the softened edges, the subtle marks of time and touch. Remember the teen, remember the night, the fire, the desert. Remember that what you are holding is not just an object of beauty, it is a story. It is a journey. It is a fragment of a life lived in motion. A symbol of a culture where history is not just written in books, but is worn, loved, and carried close to the heart. Shining softly in the moonlight, imagine a language that isn't spoken or written on paper, but worn. A language forged in fire and moonlight, telling stories of life, lineage, and legacy. This is the language of silver among the Tuareg people of the Sahara. A profound and beautiful form of communication that turns jewelry into a living archive. Today, we journey into the heart of the desert to understand how a piece of metal can hold the weight of a life story. For the Tuareg, particularly the nomadic artisans known as the teen, every single piece of silver was a specific, intentional record. This wasn't about mass production or creating inventory for some future, unknown customer. No, each piece was born from a specific moment, a deeply felt need, or a cherished memory. A woman might commission a pendant, for example, to forever commemorate the night her very first camel gave birth under the soft glow of the constellation they call the Three Maidens. Another woman, perhaps preparing to marry and move to a distant camp, might order a pair of earrings shaped exactly like the sweeping dunes of the Tuareg desert, a way to carry the memory of her homeland with her always. This language of silver was subtle, its grammar and vocabulary known intimately only by those who wore it and those who forged it. It was a secret dialect of symbols and shapes. A crescent moon, a powerful symbol in the desert, would mean one thing if its horns pointed east, but something entirely different if they pointed west. A star with 7 points was a talisman of protection, a shield against the dangers of the vast emptiness. But a star with 5 points was a quiet prayer for fertility, a hope for new life. The details were incredibly fine. A tiny, almost invisible notch carved into the edge of a pendant could signify something as monumental as completing the pilgrimage to the tomb of Tinhinan, the legendary matriarch of the Tuareg people. A series of small, meticulously hammered dots along the edge of a bracelet could encode a date, a specific location, or even a name. It was a tactile script, a story that could be read with the fingertips as much as with the eyes. For a young woman, her growing collection of silver was her autobiography, a narrative written in a language of elegant curves and sharp, meaningful points. Her very first earrings, given to her at her naming ceremony, marked her official entry into the community. Her first pendant, often a simple, pure crescent shape, would mark her transition to womanhood. As her life unfolded, more elaborate pieces would be added. One might commemorate her first successful solo caravan journey across the treacherous sands, a testament to her courage and skill. Another might celebrate the birth of her first child, a new chapter in her story. Yet another could represent the negotiation of a particularly advantageous trade agreement, showcasing her intelligence and influence. By the time she reached her elder years, a woman's neck, wrists, and ears would be adorned with the accumulated record of her entire life. It was a wearable archive, a library of personal history that she carried with her everywhere. It told her story, her triumphs, her sorrows, her journey without a single spoken word. This wasn't vanity. It was a form of literacy that transcended ink and paper. In a traditional context where few could write their name, a Tuareg woman could read her life in the silver she wore. And crucially, others could read it too. Imagine two women meeting for the first time at a distant well, or in the bustling chaos of a market in a strange oasis. Before they even exchanged a single word of greeting, their eyes would instinctively drop to each other's jewelry. In that silent, appraising glance, a conversation took place. The silver told them what they needed to know: her lineage, her marital status, her personal achievements, her sorrows. It was a dialogue conducted entirely in the shimmering language of hammered metal and reflected moonlight. Let's just pause for a moment and think about that. Picture the scene. The desert night is deep and quiet. The only sound is the gentle crackle of a small fire. In that silence, you can almost feel the weight of that profound, unspoken exchange between two women meeting for the first time. The stories told in silver, understood instantly, without the need for translation or interpretation. An entire civilization's memory, not stored away in dusty libraries or behind glass in museums. but living and breathing on the wrists and necks of women drawing water under the desert sun. It's a powerful and humbling concept. The teen themselves, the master silversmiths, were the most adorned of all. But their jewelry was more than just a personal record. It was a functional part of their craft. Each piece they wore was a tool of their trade, a mobile workshop. Their bracelets were often broad and heavy, solid enough to serve as small anvils when a suitable stone wasn't available. Their rings were ingeniously designed, holding tiny, sharp-edged stones that could be used for incising the finest, most delicate details onto a new piece. Even their earrings were part of their toolkit. They were often asymmetrical, with one side weighted more heavily than the other. This allowed the smith to gauge a perfect vertical line simply by the pull on her earlobe. They literally wore their workshop on their bodies, always ready to set up their forge at a moment's notice, under any star, in any corner of the vast Sahara. So the next time you see a piece of intricate jewelry, think beyond its beauty. Consider the possibility that it might be more than just an accessory. It could be a word, a sentence, a chapter in a long and fascinating story. The silver of the Tuareg reminds us that there are countless ways to record our history, to tell our stories, and to connect with one another on a level that words sometimes cannot reach. It is a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of art to carry the soul of a culture. Have you ever heard of a divorce so dignified, so profound, that it was witnessed by the stars themselves? It's not a line from a poem. It's a real tradition from the Kel-Tamushek, often known as the Tuareg people, the legendary blue-robed nomads of the Sahara. In their world, a woman's power isn't just symbolic. It's written into the very fabric of their homes and their laws. And when a marriage ends, it isn't with angry words or legal battles, but with a silent, powerful ritual that unfolds under the vast desert sky. Let's transport ourselves to a Tuareg camp at dawn. The air is cool and crisp, the first light painting the dunes in shades of rose and gold. Among the cluster of dark goat hair tents, one stands slightly apart. Imagine a woman sitting outside it, wrapped in deep blue cloth, her gaze fixed on the horizon as the world awakens. This isn't just any tent. This is her tent, her ihan. In the culture of the Kel-Tamushek, a woman's tent is her castle, her kingdom. This isn't a metaphor. It's a fundamental aspect of their property law. When a woman marries, she doesn't move into her husband's home. He moves into hers. The tent, the ihan, is her inheritance, passed down through the maternal line. Its worn poles and supple roof cloths are imbued with the stories of generations of women, her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, who lived, loved, and ruled beneath them. The tent is the center of family life, the heart of the home, and it belongs unequivocally to the woman. This is a crucial point to understand. In many societies, historical and contemporary, marriage often means a woman leaves her family to join her husband's, becoming part of his household. The Kel-Tamushek reversed this dynamic entirely. The husband is the one who joins the wife's world. Her home, her space, remains hers. So, what happens when the bond of marriage frays? If the union ends, the man simply packs his belongings and leaves. The tent, and everything within it, remains hers, uncontested. No arguments over property, no legal division. The domestic space is her sovereign territory. This powerful legal foundation, a woman's absolute ownership of the homes, the bedrock upon which the remarkable ritual of the divorce tent is built. While the ihan is her domain, where her word is absolute, the formal dissolution of a marriage requires something more. It needs to be acknowledged not just by the community, but by the cosmos itself. It requires celestial witness. The ritual is called the Ihan Enteri, which translates to the tent of waiting, or the tent under the stars. It begins with a silent decision. A woman who wishes to end her marriage doesn't need to announce it, argue her case, or seek permission. Her action is her declaration. She quietly gathers a specific set of materials, a length of unadorned, indigo-dyed cotton for simple wooden poles, and a small bundle of cord. With these items, she walks away from the main camp. She doesn't hide, but she seeks separation. She finds a spot that is visible, yet distant, often on a slight rise of sand. There, as the community watches in knowing silence, she erects a small, simple, square tent. Its fabric is a deep, undecorated blue, the color of the desert night sky just after the sun has vanished. This stark blue structure, standing alone against the vast landscape, is the Ihan En Teri. It is a signal everyone understands. Once the tent is pitched, she enters it alone. She carries only a small amount of water and a little food, just enough to sustain her, and then she waits. She does not speak to anyone who might approach. She offers no explanation. Her presence in this solitary tent is the entire statement. Picture this scene. A small, simple tent of deep blue cloth, pitched alone on a dune. The sun is setting behind it, its last rays turning the fabric translucent, a fragile silhouette against a sky ablaze with orange and purple. The main camp is visible in the distance, a separate world bustling with the sounds of evening life, but here there is only silence. The community's reaction is just as profound as the woman's action. No one asks questions, no one pressures her to return or to reconsider. Her husband doesn't confront her. Her family doesn't intervene. The tent of waiting is not a place of exile or shame. It is not a punishment. On the contrary, it is a sacred space of deliberation, a place of quiet communion. It is an act of immense social and spiritual significance, and it is respected by all. For 3 days and 3 nights, the woman remains in her tent. She waits under the open sky, visible to the stars, witnessed by the moon. This is not an act of hiding. It's an act of presentation. She is placing herself, her decision, and her future before the cosmos. Her still, patient body within the blue cloth walls is a testament, an offering to the same celestial arbiters who witnessed her wedding vows. She is now asking them to bear witness to their dissolution. The very sky that blessed her union is now being asked to sanction its end. This period in the tent is a time of transition. It is a space between 2 lives, the life she is leaving and the life she is about to begin. It's a period of reflection, not just for her, but for the entire community. Her silent vigil forces everyone to acknowledge the change that is taking place. It allows the social fabric to adjust, to reweave itself around this new reality without conflict or chaos. On the morning of the 4th day, the ritual concludes. The woman emerges from the tent. Her time of waiting is over. She is now considered divorced. She dismantles the blue tent with the same deliberation with which she erected it, gathers her materials, and walks back to the main camp. But she does not return to her old life. She returns to her own tent, her Ihan, now as an unmarried woman, her status clear and her dignity intact. What's more, the end of the marriage is often celebrated. The woman's family might host a party to announce her newfound freedom and availability. This isn't done to spite the former husband, but to honor the woman, to welcome her back into the fold of single life, and to reaffirm her value and place within the community. Divorce is not seen as a failure, but as a natural part of life's journey, and a woman's decision to end a union is seen as her right. This tradition tells us so much about the values of the Celt Amashek. It speaks to a deep respect for individual autonomy, especially for women. It highlights a preference for dignity over drama, for reflection over confrontation, In a world where divorce can be messy, painful, and stigmatizing, this ritual offers a model of profound grace. It elevates a personal decision into a spiritual act, connecting the human heart to the grand cycles of the universe. The tent of waiting is a powerful symbol. It's a physical manifestation of a psychological and social process. By creating a separate, temporary space, the woman is able to navigate the difficult transition of ending a relationship with clarity and strength. And by doing so publicly, yet silently, she commands the respect of her community and affirms her control over her own destiny. It's a beautiful and humbling reminder that there are many different ways to navigate the complexities of human relationships. The Keltamashek, through this ancient and elegant tradition, teach us that an ending doesn't have to be a source of shame or conflict. It can be a quiet, dignified, and even sacred passage, witnessed by the silent, watching stars. Have you ever heard of a divorce ceremony that's not about fighting, but about honor? Not about lawyers and courtrooms, but about a woman, a tent, and the stars as witnesses. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but this was a real, powerful custom among the Tuareg people, the nomadic masters of the Sahara. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about marriage, freedom, and female autonomy. So, gather around our virtual campfire, listen to the crackle of the flames, and let me take you into the heart of the desert, to a small blue tent under a canopy of stars. This ritual wasn't a sudden, impulsive act. It was a deliberate, three-night process, a journey a woman undertook to formally and spiritually end her marriage. It began with the erection of a special tent, often a vibrant blue, set apart from the main camp. This tent was her sanctuary, her courtroom, and her sacred space. The first night was the night of memory. Imagine the scene. Inside the blue tent, the air is cool and still. A woman sits on a small mat, the moonlight filtering through the fabric, casting a soft glow. Before her, she might place a few treasured items, perhaps her mother's or grandmother's silver jewelry. This wasn't a time for anger or bitterness. It was a time for remembrance, for honoring what had been. She would let her mind drift back to her wedding day. She would recall the joyous songs, the feasting that lasted for days, the vibrant colors of the celebration. She'd remember the precise moment her husband lifted the veil from her face, the promises they whispered to each other, the hopes and dreams they invested in their union. She would remember sharing salt and dates, symbols of a life they intended to build together. This first night wasn't about rejecting the past. It was about acknowledging it with reverence. A life, a home, a partnership had been built. Now, it needed to be unbricked, piece by piece, not with a sledgehammer of rage, but with the careful hands of respect. She was giving the marriage the honor of a proper farewell, acknowledging its value even as she prepared to let it go. It's a profound concept, isn't it? That an ending could begin not with erasure, but with a deep, heartfelt acknowledgement of the beginning. After the night of memory came the second night, the night of accounting. This was a night of unflinching, brutal honesty, but only with herself. Under the silent gaze of the desert sky, she would weigh the marriage, not with emotion, but with the clear-eyed precision of a merchant weighing precious salt. She would ask herself the hard questions. What led to this moment? Was it cruelty? Was it neglect? Or was it something quieter? The slow, silent erosion of affection that can leave two people feeling like strangers sharing the same tent. In this sacred space, there was no room for blame, games, or self-pity. She wasn't building a case against her husband. She was assessing the structural integrity of their life together. She would consider the union from all angles. Was there enough kindness left to sustain a life? Was there enough respect? Enough shared laughter? If the answer was no, then this wasn't a failure. It was simply an accurate assessment. She wasn't breaking a sacred vow in that moment. She was acknowledging that the vow had already been broken, frayed by time and circumstance. Honesty required her to name this truth, to speak it aloud to herself, under the silent, unwavering witness of the cosmos. This night was about clarity, about seeing the truth of her situation without illusion or fear. It was her moment to confirm that her decision was not born of whim, but of a deep, settled understanding of her reality. And then came the third and final night, the night of release. At moonrise, the woman would step out of her blue tent. She wouldn't be heading back to the main camp, not yet. She would simply stand before her temporary home, her feet in the cool desert sand, and turn her face up to the brilliant, star-dusted sky. In the profound stillness of the Sahara night, she would speak. Her voice wouldn't be a shout, but it would be clear and steady, carried on the gentle desert wind. She would state her name and her lineage, grounding herself in her identity and her ancestry. She would state the name of the man she was leaving and the length of their marriage. Then she would declare the reasons for the dissolution, not in a long, detailed complaint, but in powerful, poetic essences. Phrases like, "We have become strangers, sharing the same water," or "the respect between us has dried up like a well in drought," or the heartbreakingly simple, "My heart no longer rises at the sound of his camel." These weren't accusations, they were statements of fact, a final, public declaration of the truth she had found in the first 2 nights. After speaking her truth to the universe, she would thank the stars for their silent witness. Then she would turn and re-enter the tent for one last night. This act was the culmination of her journey. It was a release of the bond, a severing of the tie, done with dignity and profound personal authority. She wasn't asking for permission. She was informing the universe of her decision. On the dawn of the 4th day, the entire camp would understand the outcome by a simple, silent signal. If the woman remained in her blue tent, the marriage was officially over. That was it. No further ceremony was needed. No chief, no council of elders, no male judge had to approve or officiate. The celestial witnesses, the moon and the stars, had observed the ritual. Their silence was understood as consent. The woman's word, witnessed by the cosmos, was law. She would then dismantle the blue tent, folding the fabric with the same care and respect she had brought to the entire process. She would walk back to her permanent tent, her Ihan *. If her husband was still in the camp, he would already be packing his belongings. There would be no arguments, no contesting the decision. The custom was too ancient, too deeply woven into the fabric of their society, to be challenged. He would simply leave. The woman would re-enter her home, a space that was now entirely her own. She might be alone or with her children. And because Tuareg women owned the tents and held significant power, she was free. Free to live independently, and free, perhaps, to already be considering who might next be worthy of an invitation to share her life and her home. Let's just pause and absorb the weight of that. Take a moment to think about the extraordinary power embedded in that simple, elegant ritual. There are no lawyers billing by the hour, no bitter court battles, no need for male authority figures to grant permission. It's just a woman, a tent, the stars, and the unshakable social consensus that her word, her experience, and her decision, witnessed by the sky, were final and absolute. This Tuareg tradition offers a stunning counter-narrative to the historical disempowerment of women in matters of marriage and divorce. It placed the emotional and spiritual health of the woman at the center of the equation. It recognized that she was the keeper of the home's heart, and if that heart was no longer in the union, she had the absolute right to dissolve it with dignity. It teaches us that endings don't have to be destructive. They can be rituals of honor, clarity, and release. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound strength lies not in holding on, but in knowing when and how to let go. Let's journey into the heart of the Sahara, to a people whose traditions shimmer with a wisdom that challenges our own. We're talking about the Tuareg, often called the blue people for the indigo dye that stains their skin. Among their many fascinating customs, one stands out as a beacon of female empowerment, a practice so radical it feels almost futuristic, yet it's ancient. It's the ritual of the divorce tent. Imagine this: a Tuareg woman decides her marriage is over. She doesn't need to argue, to plead, or to seek permission. She simply erects a small, separate tent. This isn't just any tent. It's a special blue tent, set up a short distance from the main family camp. This act, simple yet profound, signals the end of her marriage. This divorce tent wasn't merely a legal formality. It was a public declaration of her autonomy, a powerful statement in a world where women were, and often still are, treated as property. For the Tuareg, a woman's right to initiate and finalize her own divorce was a given. The blue tent made this right visible, tangible. It was a message written in cloth and starlight, declaring that her person was her own, her consent could not be assumed, and her commitment could not be held hostage. When she returned to the main camp after the ritual, she wasn't seen as broken or shamed. Picture her sitting at the entrance of her own tent, her posture relaxed and confident, her silver jewelry catching the morning sun. She is alone, perhaps, but not lonely. She is whole. This ritual wasn't just about female freedom, it also served as a powerful check on male behavior. Every Tuareg husband lived with the knowledge that the blue tent could be erected at any time, without warning and without any chance for him to appeal the decision. He knew his wife's patience wasn't infinite, that her tolerance had clear limits, and crucially, those limits were enforced not by his goodwill, but by her own sovereign will. This constant awareness shaped Tuareg marriages into partnerships that were far more balanced and respectful than in many other societies, both past and present. The potential of the blue tent wasn't a weapon used to threaten or control. It was the very foundation of the relationship. It ensured that marriage was a continuous negotiation between equals, not a dominion of one person over another. It fostered a culture where respect had to be earned and maintained, day in and day out. This wasn't a threat of abandonment, but a promise of equality. The materials themselves carried deep meaning. The blue cloth of the tent was significant. Indigo, the iconic color of the Tuareg, was linked to nobility, to the vast desert sky, and even to the divine. But the divorce tent was made of unadorned indigo. Unlike the richly embroidered fabrics of wedding tents or ceremonial garments, this cloth was simple, almost stark. Its beauty was in its humility, its sincerity, its raw honesty. It represented the stripped-down essence of a person. When a woman entered the divorce tent, she shed her roles. She wasn't a wife or a mother in that moment. She wore her simplest clothes, maybe only her most basic silver jewelry. She was just herself, a human being under the infinite sky, asking to be seen, heard, and believed in her truth. The simplicity of the tent and her attire underscored the gravity and purity of her decision. It was a return to self, a quiet but firm reclamation of her identity. And what about the children? In a move that still feels progressive today, the children of a dissolved marriage remained with the mother. This was customary law, unquestioned. The tent, the domestic heart of the family, was hers. Therefore, the children born within it were considered part of her lineage and her responsibility. The father wasn't cast out from their lives. He retained his connection and his duties to provide for them. But custody was never a point of contention. The Tuareg social structure is matrilineal. The maternal line is seen as the strong trunk of the family tree, while the paternal line is a vital branch. So, when a woman returned from her time in the blue tent, her children were there, waiting for her. During her ritual seclusion, they were cared for by her community, her sisters, her mother, her female relatives, and friends. The society didn't fracture. It absorbed the change and reformed around her, offering support. The divorce tent wasn't a rupture in the social fabric. It was a careful stitch, a deliberate unpicking and reweaving to ensure the strength and health of the whole community. Now, it's important to remember that no human system is perfect. There were surely complexities and individual heartaches, as there are in any society. But for centuries, the Tuareg divorce tent provided a functioning model of female legal and social autonomy in a world overwhelmingly dominated by patriarchal structures. It was a system built on a foundation of deeply held cultural beliefs. They believed that the stars in the desert sky were silent witnesses to all oaths and decisions. They believed that a woman's word was binding and held its own authority. They believed that the domestic sphere, the world of the tent, was a woman's sovereign territory. Above all, they believed that freedom wasn't a privilege granted by men, but a fundamental condition to be maintained by women themselves through daily acts of custom and courage. The divorce tent was the most visible symbol of these powerful beliefs. It was just a few square feet of simple blue cloth, but within its folds, it held the weight of a civilization's profound commitment to the dignity, autonomy, and strength of women. It's a reminder that there are many ways to build a society, many definitions of strength, and that sometimes the most radical ideas are the ones that have been quietly practiced for centuries under the silent, watchful eyes of the desert stars. Imagine, if you will, the vast, silent expanse of the Sahara. For centuries, it was a world navigated not by lines on paper, but by the stars, the shape of the dunes, and an ancient oral tradition. This tradition, a collection of poems and songs known as the Tiznak, was the true map of the desert, passed down through generations, primarily by women, the moon's daughters. They were the keepers of the way, the living libraries of the sand. But the 20th century brought a new kind of map, one born far from the desert's heat and dust. In the ornate halls of European capitals, men who had never felt the Sahara's sun or slept under its stars gathered around tables. With rulers and ink, they drew straight, unyielding lines across the landscape. These lines carved up the ancestral lands of the Keltamashek, the people of the desert, creating territories like French West Africa, French Algeria, and Italian Libya. These colonial borders would later become the national boundaries of Mali, Niger, Algeria, and Burkina Faso. To the camels, these lines were invisible. To the constellations that had guided travelers for millennia, they meant nothing. But to the people of the desert, and especially to the women who held the Tisnak in their hearts, these lines meant everything. They were a profound and violent interruption of a way of life that had flowed as freely as the wind for 1,000 years. Suddenly, journeys that were as natural as breathing became illegal. The ancient caravan route from the salt mines of Taudini to the bustling markets of Timbuktu, a path trod by countless ancestors, was now bisected by an imaginary but heavily enforced barrier. The seasonal migration from the date palm oases of the Air Massif to the lush grazing lands of the Azawad now required papers, permits, and permissions from authorities who did not understand the desert's rhythm. The Tisnak still sang of the path, the verses still described the way, but the way itself was now forbidden. The daughters of the moon, however, were resilient. They had adapted to shifting sands and changing seasons for generations, and they would adapt to this new challenge as well. They began to find new ways, secret passages that wound between the official border crossings. They learned the new languages of survival, the art of the bribe, the power of a disarming smile, the skill of melting back into the dunes before a patrol could spot them. Their knowledge of the land, once used to find water, was now used to evade capture. But this new world was relentless. With each passing year, the borders hardened. Concrete posts and barbed wire began to scar the landscape, replacing the subtle markers of rock and acacia tree. Customs, officials, soldiers, and police became a permanent feature of the horizon. The old women, the keepers of the song, listened with heavy hearts as the verses of the Tisnak began to thin. Certain routes, now deemed too dangerous, were no longer attempted. The corresponding verses, once sung with confidence around the evening fire, were now uttered less frequently, their melodies tinged with a new sadness. The song was not forgotten, it was still memorized, still taught with fierce devotion, but its function was changing. It was slowly, inexorably, becoming a memorial rather than a map. A beautiful, tragic archive of a world that was disappearing. Let's pause for a moment here. Can you feel the weight of this? Imagine sitting by a crackling fire, the desert night vast and cool around you. The tragedy of those invisible lines is not just about restricted movement. It's about the severing of memory, the unraveling of a culture woven from place and poetry. When a route is no longer traveled, its verse in the Tisnak becomes a ghost. The star that marked the turning point still rises. The uniquely shaped dune still stands guard. But the connection between them, the living, breathing knowledge of how to move from one to the other, begins to fade. It's like a library where the books are still on the shelves, but the language they are written in is slowly being forgotten. The knowledge is there, but its power, its life, is draining away. The elders, the wise matriarchs of the caravans, saw this coming. They looked at the new concrete posts and the young, uncomprehending soldiers, and they understood. These borders were not temporary. The old freedom of the desert, the birthright of their people, was ending. They could not fight the armies or erase the lines on the map, but they could fight to preserve the memory. And so they made a profound decision. They would organize one last great caravan. This journey would not be for salt, or for dates, or for trade, though they would carry these things to give the journey its familiar shape and purpose. No, the true purpose of this caravan was far grander. They would travel the full arc of the Tisili, the great route, one of the longest and most sacred paths in their tradition. They would travel to sing the song one more time, in its entirety, over its complete geography. They would walk the path, see the landmarks, and sing the verses in the very places they described. They would embed the memory of the entire route into the feet, the minds, and the hearts of the youngest generation. A final, defiant act of cultural preservation before the borders closed for good. This last great caravan was an act of sacred resistance. It was a pilgrimage to the soul of their people. They gathered the youngest and strongest, children who had only ever known a world of emerging borders. The elders led the way, their voices, though weathered, ringing with the authority of generations. As they walked, they sang of the well of the gazelles, and as they reached it, they drank from its waters. They sang of the Three Sisters, a trio of distinctive flat-topped mountains, and they camped in their shadow. Each verse was brought to life, each landmark honored. The children didn't just hear the map. They walked it. They felt the grit of the sand from the Tuareg desert under their feet, and tasted the sweetness of dates from the Gadem's oasis. The Tisnek became more than a song. It became a part of their bodies, a memory etched into their very being. This journey was a race against time. The colonial powers were solidifying their control. and the idea of a massive, unpermitted caravan crossing multiple international borders was unthinkable to them. The elders knew they were likely to be stopped. They knew the risks, but the risk of losing their entire culture, their entire map of the world, was greater. They were carrying the soul of a people on the backs of their camels, a fragile cargo in a world that had no value for it. For the young ones on that journey, it was a profound education. They learned that a certain configuration of stars didn't just look beautiful. It pointed the way to a hidden well. They learned that the texture of the sand changing underfoot meant they were entering a new region, with its own stories and its own spirits. They were learning a language older than any written word, a language of land and sky, of poetry and survival. They were becoming the new libraries, the living repositories of the Tiznak, charged with carrying it into an uncertain future. This last caravan was more than a journey. It was a ritual. It was a testament to the idea that a culture is not just a collection of artifacts in a museum. It is a living, breathing thing. It is the story you tell your children, the song you sing to find your way home, the knowledge that connects you to your ancestors and to the land that formed you. The women of the Kel Tamashek, by undertaking this final, epic journey, were ensuring that even if the paths were blocked, the map would never be lost. It would live on, carried in the hearts and memories of the moon's daughters. A song waiting for a day when the desert might once again be free. In the heart of the Sahara, as the first cool nights of the season began to settle over the land, a caravan assembled. It gathered at the well of Ingol, just south of the majestic Air Mountains. By the grand standards of the old days, this caravan might have seemed small. Just 40 women and about 100 camels. But don't let the numbers fool you. This was no ordinary journey. It was a deliberate, intentional act, a pilgrimage of memory. Every single participant had been chosen with the utmost care, each with a vital role to play in this sacred endeavor. First, there were the teen. These were the masterful artisans. The silversmiths carrying their portable forges with them. Their purpose was not trade, but commemoration. They were there to capture the very essence of the journey, to forge its memory into lasting silver, creating a tangible record of an intangible heritage. Then there were the grandmothers. These women were the living libraries, the keepers of the Tiznak, the great song of the Tuareg. Their voices might have grown thin with age, but their memories were as sharp and precise as the desert stars. They held the map, not on paper, but in their minds, in the verses of an ancient song that described the land, the roots, and the very soul of their people. And finally, there were the girls. Some were barely 10 years old, perched atop camels that seemed far too large for their small frames. Their young faces were set in a look of determined concentration, a seriousness that belied their age. They were not just on an adventure, they were apprentices in the most profound sense, tasked with absorbing a legacy on the verge of being lost. Imagine the scene at dawn. The golden light spills over the horizon, painting the dunes in hues of orange and pink. The air is cool and crisp. The caravan begins to move from the well, a slow, silent procession. The women ride with their faces forward, their expressions solemn, their purpose clear. This wasn't a journey of commerce or migration. It was a journey into the past, a final, desperate attempt to preserve a way of life that was fading like a mirage in the midday sun. They were traveling to remember. The journey north became a living, breathing recitation of the great song. Each day they traveled, and each night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the tents were pitched in a protective circle, the true lesson would begin. The grandmothers would gather the girls around them. Under the vast, star-dusted canopy of the Saharan sky, they would point to the constellations as they rose. See that star? A grandmother might say, her voice a soft murmur against the desert silence. That is the marker for the next well. And this is the verse that guides us there. And then they would sing. The ancient verses would rise into the cool night air, weaving a tapestry of navigation, history, and spirituality. But this was different from how it had always been done. This was not the patient, years-long process of a grandmother passing down her knowledge to her granddaughter during countless journeys. Time had run out for that. This was a final examination, a last desperate rehearsal before the curtain fell. The girls were not simply learning the song. They were being asked to memorize the experience of the song. They had to feel the texture of the sand under their feet at that specific latitude, taste the unique quality of the air at a particular well, feel the direction of the wind as it whispered through a certain pass. They were being tasked with creating a sensory archive, to remember not just the words of the Tiznak, but the entire physical and emotional totality of the route itself. It was an immense burden, a sacred responsibility placed upon their young shoulders. And while the girls memorized the feeling of the journey, the teen worked to give it form. Each night, their tiny forges would glow like small, steady stars at the edge of the encampment. The rhythmic tap-tap of their hammers was the heartbeat of the caravan. They were not taking commissions or making trinkets for a market. They were creating a permanent physical record. Every significant campsite, every life-giving well, every towering dune that the grandmothers identified as a crucial landmark from the song was immortalized in silver. A pendant was crafted for the well of Tazolet, its design perhaps echoing the sweet water and the ancient date palms that grew there. A ring was forged for the pass of Tigipa, its twisted shape mirroring the howl of the wind that the song described as a wounded animal. A bracelet for the salt flats of Taudini, polished to a blinding whiteness that captured the feeling of the noon sun on a landscape as vast and stark as an ocean of salt. Each piece was a chapter, a verse made solid, a memory you could hold in your hand. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine yourself there. The fire crackles, sending sparks dancing into the infinite darkness. The gentle, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping camels surrounds you. The night air is cool on your skin. Can you feel the profound intentionality of that journey? It's almost overwhelming to consider. These women were not traveling to trade goods. They were not traveling to escape a threat. They were not even traveling with a destination in mind, in the way we usually think of one. They were traveling for the sake of the journey itself. They were traveling to remember. Every mile they crossed was a verse in the song. Every night they camped was a chapter in the story. Each campsite, with its fire, its shared food, and its lessons under the stars, was a stanza in the last full, living recitation of the great song. It was a performance for no audience but themselves and the ancestors who walked the same path. A performance against the encroaching silence of forgetting. The journey took 40 nights, exactly as the Tiznak described. For 40 nights, they moved through a landscape that seemed to hold its breath for them. In a world increasingly carved up by lines on maps, they encountered no borders, no officials demanding papers, no interference from the modern world. It was as if the Sahara itself, for those 40 nights, decided to forget that the colonial lines drawn across its face even existed. It allowed them this one last, uninterrupted pilgrimage. Overhead, the stars wheeled in their ancient, familiar patterns. The same patterns their ancestors had navigated by for millennia. The camels, patient and enduring, followed the women. The women followed the grandmothers. And the grandmothers followed the song. For 40 sacred nights, they were free in the old way. They moved through the landscape, not as trespassers or tourists, but as a part of it, guided not by GPS or printed maps, but by a deeper, more resonant knowledge, the power of memory, poetry, and song. They were the living embodiment of their culture, a moving testament to the idea that some maps are not drawn on paper, but sung on the wind and etched into the heart. This journey wasn't just about preserving a song. It was about preserving a worldview, a connection to the land that is almost impossible for us to comprehend in our disconnected world. The Tisnak wasn't just a set of directions. It was their identity. It told them who they were, where they came from, and how to live in harmony with one of the harshest environments on Earth. And in this caravan of 40 women, this mobile university of memory, that identity was being passed on in its purest, most potent form. The silver pendants and rings were the physical artifacts, but the real treasure was being encoded into the minds and bodies of those young girls. They were becoming the new keepers of the Tisnak. They were becoming the song. When the 40 nights were over, and they reached the journey's end, as foretold in the final verse, nothing and everything had changed. They returned not with riches, but with something far more valuable, a renewed certainty. The world around them would continue to change, to erect borders and build cities. But for 40 nights, they had stepped outside of that world. They had walked within their own story, and in doing so, ensured that the story would not end. The grandmothers had passed on their wisdom, the teen had forged its symbols, and the girls now carried the desert within them. They carried the stars, the wells, the wind, and the words. They carried the great song, ready for a future when it might be sung freely once more. On the 40th night, the caravan made its camp. It was the last dune before the border. A thin, invisible line drawn on a map by strangers. A line that was about to sever them from their history. Beyond this ridge, the ancient route stretched north, leading to the Ahagar Mountains, to the tombs of their ancestors, to lands that would soon be sealed off forever. The caravan would not cross. This was the end of the line, the terminus of memory. As the sun sank, it painted the dune in strokes of fire and shadow. The western crest burned a brilliant gold, while the eastern face fell into a deep, cool purple. On the sheltered side, the caravan had pitched its tents in a tight, protective circle. The camels grunted softly, their long journey nearing its close, and in the quiet space between the tents, the women began to gather. There was no order given, no meeting called. It was an instinct, a pull as old as the tides. As the first stars pricked the deepening twilight, first Venus, the evening star, then the 3 maidens of the belt, and finally the great, misty river of the Milky Way. The gathering grew. They came not by tent, not by family lineage, not by age. All of them, the grandmothers, their faces a beautiful map of wrinkles, arrived in their finest indigo robes, their cherished silver jewelry gleaming in the fading light. The mothers followed, their faces etched with the weariness of the 40-day journey, but their eyes were bright, alive with purpose. And then came the girls, their movements silent and watchful. They were young, some barely women, but they understood. They knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that this night would be seared into their minds forever. They settled in a great circle on the sand, the campfires now reduced to glowing, watchful embers. The low murmur of conversation faded into a profound silence, a silence that held the weight of centuries. Then, a single voice rose into the cool desert air. It was one of the grandmothers. Her voice was thin with age, fragile as a dry leaf, yet it was unwavering. She began to sing. Not just any song, not a simple verse or a familiar chapter. She began at the very beginning. She sang the first verse of the Tisnak, the great oral epic of their people. The verse that described the departure from the ancestral homeland in a distant, almost mythical past. It was a story of origin, of identity, of a people born from the desert itself. As her voice hung in the air, another joined her, then another. The other grandmothers picked up the melody, their voices weaving together. Then the mothers joined in, their voices richer, stronger, a foundation of sound beneath the elders' melody. Verse followed verse, a continuous, unbroken stream of history and poetry. They sang of great migrations, of heroes and heroines, of battles fought not with swords, but with endurance and knowledge. They sang of the stars, not as distant points of light, but as a map, a guide, a celestial scripture that had led their people across the vast featureless sands for generations. Each constellation had a name, a story, a place in the grand narrative of their freedom. This wasn't just a performance. It wasn't a lesson in a classroom. It was an act of profound and desperate preservation. They were singing the Tisnak, not just for the ears of the girls, but into their very memories, embedding it deep within their being. They were singing it into the sand beneath them, into the ancient, silent dunes. They were singing it to the stars, entrusting their story to the cosmos. They were making the song so present, so dense with meaning and emotion, that it could never be forgotten, never be erased by a line on a map. They were weaving the geography of their freedom into the very fabric of their daughters' souls. The girls sat motionless, their eyes wide in the dim light. They listened with an intensity that absorbed every note, every word, every subtle shift in tone. They were the vessels, the living archives who would carry this knowledge forward. They were witnessing the transfer of a world. The song described the network of wells, the hidden pastures, the subtle signs in the landscape that meant the difference between life and death. It was a map made of poetry, a guide to a land they might never be allowed to travel in the old way, but they would know it. In their minds, in their hearts, they would hold the entire expanse of their ancestral territory. The night deepened. The constellations wheeled slowly across the sky, a silent audience to the ceremony below. The women sang on, their voices a complex, layered harmony that rose and fell like the dunes themselves. They sang without pause, without rest. When one voice faltered with fatigue, another would swell to support it. It was a collective effort, a testament to their resilience, their unity. They were a circle of strength, a fortress of memory against the encroaching silence of a new world order. Through the long hours, the song charted the known world. It painted pictures of bustling markets in cities with names like Agadez and Timbuktu. It spoke of the salt caravans, the long lines of camels moving like a slow river across the Turner, a desert within a desert. It recounted genealogies, tracing lineages back to the first matriarchs, the queens who ruled with wisdom and strength. Every verse was a piece of the puzzle, a thread in the magnificent tapestry of who they were. As the first hint of grey began to soften the eastern sky, a subtle shift occurred in the song. The grandmothers, their energy nearly spent, reached the final verses. These were the verses that described the return journey, the closing of the circle, the triumphant arrival back at the well of Ingol, where the caravan had begun its journey 40 nights ago. But the song and reality had diverged. The caravan had not returned. It was here, stranded at the edge of its own history. So the final verses were not sung as a description of what was. They were sung as prophecy, as a powerful hope, as a desperate prayer. The words spoke of homecoming, but the melody was filled with a poignant longing. The song ended not with a satisfying resolution, but with a note of suspension. A single, high, sustained note that hung in the cold dawn air like a question mark, like a breath held in anticipation. Then silence. A silence more profound than before. No one spoke. The grandmothers, utterly exhausted, leaned against each other for support, their task complete. The mothers began to stir, moving slowly, almost reverently. To prepare the morning meal, the familiar ritual, a comforting anchor after the night's emotional odyssey. But the girls remained perfectly still, their hands resting in their laps. Their eyes were distant, looking inward. Their mouths silently formed the shapes of the words they had just heard, practicing the verses, solidifying them in their memory. They had just heard the song for the first and perhaps the last time in its full geographic context. That day, the caravan would turn round. It would head south, back the way it had come, tracing its own fading footsteps in reverse. There would be no protest, no confrontation at the border. They would not draw attention to themselves. They would simply disappear back into the desert from which they came. But something had changed. The song remained. It was no longer just a story. It was a part of them, embedded in their memories, carried in their blood. These girls would grow into women. They might never follow those northern stars in the old way, navigating across a borderless, open desert under the full authority of their own ancient knowledge. The world had drawn a line they could not undraw. But they would remember the stars. They would remember the verses. And they would always remember the night their grandmothers sang the geography of freedom directly into their souls under the eternal witness of the ancient sky. The map was now within them, and no border could ever take it away. And so, the story of the moon's daughters settles into the quiet of the night. Our own fire has burned low, its embers glowing like the distant campfires of the ancestors, scattered across the dark fabric of the sky. We have journeyed with the women of the Kel Tamashek through their starlit world, and we have felt, perhaps, the weight of what they carried. A weight not of burden, but of purpose, of immense and beautiful responsibility. They carried songs that were also maps, verses that were also compasses, melodies that were also memories. Imagine that, a song that could guide you through the shifting sands, a melody that held the history of a people. They carried silver that was also autobiography, each piece of jewelry an archive, each amulet a covenant with their past and their future. Their tents were not just shelters, they were assertions of sovereignty, a portable homeland. The deep blue cloth they wore was a declaration of identity, a flag woven from indigo and pride. Even their customs, like the 3 nights of waiting for a guest, were the foundations of their law, a social contract lived and breathed, not written on paper. And on that last, deliberate caravan, that fateful journey, they carried the entire weight of their free history across 40 nights of sand and stars. They were unmoving it to preserve it in museums, behind glass, or in dusty manuscripts on a shelf. No, their purpose was far more vital, more alive. They carried it to sing it, to breathe it, to weave it directly into the hearts of their daughters, ensuring the legacy would not just be remembered, but lived. Then the world changed. The borders, lines drawn on maps by distant hands, closed. The old routes, trod for generations, became illegal. The grandmothers, the ones who sang the full Tiznek on that final night, have since joined their ancestors under the very stars they once navigated. One might think this was the end, the silencing of a culture. But the song did not die. It cannot die. It lives in the daughters, and in their daughters, a resilient, unbroken thread. It lives in the silver that still adorns their wrists and necks, each piece a chapter, a verse. It lives in the powerful memory of that 40-night journey, passed down not as wistful nostalgia for a lost past, but as a living legacy, a blueprint for survival and identity. It lives in the quiet, persistent practice of freedom. This is key. For them, freedom wasn't a political achievement to be won or lost. It's a way of being, a way of walking through the world, of reading the sky, of knowing with unshakable certainty who you are and where you belong, no matter what lines are drawn on the earth. So, The moon's daughters did not lose their freedom when the borders were drawn. They simply packed it up and carried it with them, nestled in their saddlebags alongside their songs and their silver. They adapted it. They translated it for a new world. They preserved it, and they continue to carry it today in the bustling cities and towns where many have now settled. They carry it in the camps where some still follow the reduced modern routes. They carry it in the ateliers where the smiths, still work silver under the glare of electric lights, all the while remembering the soft, ancient glow of the moonlight on their ancestors' hammers. The world may look different, but the essentials remain. The stars remain. The sky is still the same sky the grandmothers navigated, and the daughters, though they may never cross the vast desert in the old way, can still look up on a clear night. They can still find the three maidens, those familiar stars, standing eternal guard over the sleeping camel's hump in the celestial landscape. They can still hear, in the profound silence of their own hearts, the echo of their grandmothers' voices singing the map of their freedom. A song that no border can contain and no passage of time can erase. The night is deep. The story, carried across centuries of sand and starlight, is now complete. You are under Baobab skies. Thank you for journeying with us.